This program is underwritten in part by
Janelle Encarnacion Art. Carlos Furniture, a family-owned business, has been providing furniture, appliances, and household accessories since 1997. The flagship store on St. Croix and another on St. Thomas are both open for in-store shopping and are able to ship to various locations in the Caribbean.
and viewers like you. The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.
Welcome to the Bookcase. I'm your host, Shawna Richards, a sometime writer and a longtime reader. I invite you to join me as we explore the bookcase and celebrate Virgin Islands authors and talent. Each week on the Bookcase, we'll introduce you to a local author and learn more about them and their work. A storyteller lives in each of us, and I am so excited to give our homegrown storytellers a chance to tell their story. Tonight's selection from the Bookcase is Myrrh, and I'm honored to welcome its author, Melissa Fredericks. Melissa, welcome to the Bookcase. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Shawna. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about my book.
So you are a native Virgin Islander, born and raised on St. Thomas.
Yes.
Tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure, I was born and raised on the island of St. Thomas. I went to school there for my entire, we'll call it elementary and secondary education. I went to the States. I went to Indiana for my bachelor's degree, and then I came back to the Virgin Islands, and I taught for 5 years at my alma mater at All Saints Cathedral School. And while I did that, I got my master's degree in education at UVI. So I'm an alumni of DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana, and also of the University of the Virgin Islands.
So how did your experience as an educator help to inform your writing in Myrrh?
That's an excellent question. For me, at the time I was writing, or I was teaching first grade. I was teaching first grade when I first came up with the idea for the book. And my undergrad degree is in communications, and so I had taken a creative writing class. And one day I was teaching first grade. One evening I was sleeping, and I had this dream about a mermaid in Victorian clothing. And I was like, this is weird. This is odd. What is this? So the next day I came into school and I was telling another teacher in the teacher's lounge, I said, I had this weird dream. Let me tell you about it. And then I said, I think I'm going to write a book about it. I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to write a book. And the reason why is because one of my favorite authors is C.S. Lewis. Mm-hmm. And he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. And what he said was that when he was a young boy, he had a dream about a fawn in a snowy forest with parcels under its arm. And I thought, like, this is weird. He had a weird dream. I had a weird dream. I should write a book. So that was the impetus for Myrrh. And so throughout the book, you're going to see a lot of the engagement that I had, not necessarily with my first graders, but with my high schoolers, mm-hmm. to try to get them interested in literature and try to get them interested in reading, because they were not. I wish that they were, mm-hmm. but they were not interested in reading at all. And so I said, well, how do I come up with an adventure that's going to get them tied into literature?
So when you were writing Myrrh,
mm-hmm.
That was inspired by a dream. Mm-hmm. You didn't write about first graders.
No.
You wrote about high schoolers.
Yes.
Did you also teach high schoolers?
I taught first grade, I taught middle school, and I taught high school. I taught speech communications, I taught technical writing, and I taught grammar. So all of those things were super helpful for me when I was writing the book. And I had a phenomenal time. I enjoyed my teaching time, hence me getting a master's degree in education. Because initially I had gotten my bachelor's in communication, and then I came back to St. Thomas. I had gotten into NYU. I was going to go to the Tisch School of Arts. Mm-hmm. I was like, I'm going to be fancy. And then my financial aid packet came back, and I was like, oh, well, my financial aid needs financial aid. I need, this money needs money. And so I ended up teaching at All Saints for 5 years. And the first year I was a curmudgeon. Like I was like, I don't know if I really want to do this. I don't know if this is going to pan out, but I loved it. I fell in love with my students. And then I was all in. So I did things like I was a coach for Moot Court. We did the Shakespeare Festival. So we did a lot of different things. We put on plays and poetry recitals. And so from that was the fuel for the students that you see in the book. And so all of my students know, I told them in advance, I said, hey, I wrote this book. I put your name in it. I just want to let you know it's a character based on you. It's not you.
In your book, you talk a lot about Virgin Island structures that are recognizable.
Yeah.
I think to anyone who knows the community. Why was it important for you to include those elements in a fantasy book?
Because I wanted people to see themselves. I love fantasy, I love science fiction, and I had never read a book that was based in the Caribbean. I've never seen that. And I was like, but I know that my kids watch science fiction. I know that they're looking at fantasy things on television. I would love for them to be able to see themselves in this setting. And so I made a really, case in point, like I have pictures in the book of very specific places because I wanted them to be able to see themselves. I think it's so important for us to see ourselves in spaces where we might not see ourselves or think that we exist. And I was like, we do. We exist in a place that's beautiful, that has culture and it has a heritage. And I think that it's important for us to recognize and acknowledge that we have really monumental places in the Virgin Islands. And I wanted to showcase that for people, all over the world.
You have photos of the mermaid's chair.
Yes. Yeah.
And you wrote an entire book.
Yes.
About mermaids.
I did. Yeah. Yes. So I wanted people to see like, oh, and so I will tell you, I did not know that Mermaid's Chair existed before I wrote the book.
Really?
Yeah.
How did you find out about it?
I think I was just telling somebody, I was like, oh yeah, I'm writing a book about mermaids. And they were like, oh, you went down to Mermaid's Chair in Botany Bay. And I was like, no, but thank you for sharing.
And that's quite a hike.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a straight like descent. And if you're coming back, you're like, oh goodness, I don't know if I want to make this trek. But it's beautiful. It's that like it's a very small strip that separates the Caribbean Sea from the Atlantic Ocean. And so if you have an opportunity, you should definitely go see Mermaid's Chair.
So in your book, you write about this teacher and her students, and she gives them a challenge.
Yes.
And says, and I don't want to give away too much of the story, but she gives them a challenge and says, well, if you finish this assignment, the best people, I'm going to do something at my house.
Yes. Yeah. And that came from like when I was a little kid, our teachers would have things at their house. That was the field trip. Oh, we're gonna go over to the teacher's house. And we're like, this is amazing. I remember in 4th grade, I had broken my arm and I went to my teacher's house like the day after I got the cast removed. We went to McDonald's. I had a Big Mac and I was like, that's fancy because I had I can hold it in my hand finally. And we went to her house and we watched Willow. And that was a class trip, like that was a field trip. And so I thought to myself, those were great field trips for me. And I would love to extend that to my students. So, the best time in school is like when you don't have to be in school. Like, let's be 100. Like,
I agree.
If I can be at school but don't have to do any schoolwork, I'd be like, this is amazing. So the prize is for the students to come to her house, and it's a historical home, and there is a underwater observatory, and they get in there, and that's when all the mermaid goodness ensues.
If not for this dream that you had, do you think you would have one day found your way to writing a fantasy story?
No. I had no intentions of writing a book. And it felt, I felt pressed upon to like, this is a story that you have to write. And one of the reasons why I went through self-publishing and not through a traditional publishing process was that I didn't want anybody to tell me no. And I was like, well, this isn't really this is a dream that I felt God gave me. And I was like, I don't want anybody to break that stride. I don't want anybody to tell me that this is not a thing. And I was like, let me just do this by myself and not try to seek outside validation. Because for me, it wasn't about other people validating it. It was about, this was a gift and I have to make this gift actionable.
So you never explored any traditional publisher?
I went straight for self-publishing. And the reason really is like, I know what that system is like in terms of rejection. And I was like, but this isn't my book. So I don't want anybody to stop me from writing this story simply because that's what they think. And I was like, nah, I'm gonna do it.
How was the self-publishing experience for you from start to finish?
It was really great. I ended up actually meeting a self-publishing coach. And I was at a conference, and he was talking about, this is how you do your own book. And I was like, oh, I have a book. What
kind of conference were you at?
I was at a conference for sales. I was at a sales conference. And this is the guy who was like, oh, I'm going to teach you how to write your own book. And I was like, oh. And I literally was the very first client that he had that wrote fiction. Like everybody else's books that he had done before were nonfiction. So I'm his only like self-published fictional author. And it was a great experience. He walked me through the process. He connected me with the the people who you needed to get your Library of Congress number. He hooked me up with the person who does the book design. There's all of these facets of publishing that if you've never done it, you have no idea. And so it was really insightful. It was really good. And it was a process. It took maybe 2 or 3 years because part of it was like, do I have this money? And
So did that also include an editor?
Yes.
So
we got an
just
editor.
Make sure that your product that you put out into the world was the best
Yes.
product. Okay.
Yes. Self-publishing doesn't mean not doing all the things that you're supposed to do. So I had an editor, I had a book design person, I had a person who like laid the book out, and we did all of the imagery inside of the book. Yes, you need to have all of those things, and you need to pay people to do them because I don't have the expertise. Like I taught grammar, but I can't edit my own work. Like that's not a real thing. So yes, you need to pay people to do the hard work for you.
But all the photos in the book of Mermaid's Chair, all
those
of the
actually
photos,
I
you took those yourself.
Yeah. So the vast majorities of the pictures that I put in the book, those I took myself.
So in putting together Mer, and you talked about representation, what were you reading when you were younger? And where were you not seeing yourself in those stories?
So again, C.S. Lewis, I loved The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I think I was probably like 5th or 6th grade when I was introduced to that series. And I connected with the characters in that book. The problem was none of those characters look like me. But that was okay. I didn't feel like, the person has to look like me. It just, in my mind, I was thinking like, what if you could create a character who did look like you? How would that feel? How would that be different? There's very few Caribbean voices to me in the book, the young adult book industry. And so I never heard anybody on television speaking the way that I speak. So, I watched television and I would imitate the people who I saw on TV, but they didn't sound like me. And so you'll watch or you'll listen to like NPR. I love NPR, it's great. But everybody sounds the same.
But you mentioned C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia. And that was also a favorite of mine growing up. But then I reread it as an adult. And it had some pretty serious themes.
Yes. Yeah. And
that went over my little, 10-year-old head.
It does. And it's so interesting because I was like, oh, this is a Bible story. It's an allegory of Christ. So I was like, oh, this is super cool. But then also the more I read, the more you read the Bible, the more you understand what C.S. Lewis is actually saying. And you're like, oh, that's what he's talking about. I had no idea. So and I wanted the book also, Mer, to be a gateway to have people to learn about Christianity in a way that was non-intrusive, or I wanted to be like as clever as C.S. Lewis. I'm not that clever. I'm gonna just tell you that. But I wanted to give children an opportunity to kind of think through like, oh, okay, these are some themes.
So it's not just a story about Victorian mermaids.
No, it is not. So there's history, There is conservationism. So if you're somebody who is really passionate about taking care of the Virgin Islands as it is, this is a great book for you. If you're somebody who's passionate about VI history, this is a great book for you. If you want to see like what Caribbean students, how they talk and how they behave, this is a good book for you. Like if you want to see the mindset of a teacher, this is a great book for you. Because I tell in all the tea, right? Like these are all the things that teachers are saying.
But it was also very authentic.
Yeah.
When you talked about our uniforms, our school uniforms, and you talked about the history of that and the colonial, colonialism,
remnants
yes, behind of wearing uniforms, and simple things like that. And I had to chuckle in reading the book when you talked about how every couple of years, the uniform debate rages.
Right. And you can't get rid of them. I mean, like, but they're great. I loved uniforms. They were simple. I didn't have to think about what I was going to wear. Like as an adult, I was like, man, I should have a uniform. This is great.
Makes life
easier. Yeah. But I mean, like it has its purpose. It has its place, but it does come from a colonial, past. But it's, and then also, so the book also, it's funny because I know you look at it and you're like, oh, Mer, it's a fantasy book. Yes. But I also talk about not just Caribbean history, but the history of the slave trade in Africa. And what were our ancestors thinking when they sold us to people, right? What was that system like? How did that impact the people and the cultures and the countries who participated in the transatlantic slave trade from Africa? And so it's doing a lot of things, but I think in a pretty fun and engaging way.
But you, even in the first opening chapters of Mer, you talk about, the house. And the house is constructed with, old materials, probably built by enslaved people.
Yeah.
And that house itself is a main character in your story.
Yeah, and it's based on our family home. The construction is not the same as it is in the book, but what I am kind of tapping into is the beauty of like Virgin Islands architecture is gorgeous.
It is,
and we have all of these natural stones, and we build these or unique walls and architecture, and I love when I see the walls that have like the shells in them, and it's beautiful, right? And so part of this is also it's an homage to the Virgin Islands. It's a love story to the VI.
Very much.
Yeah.
And that's what I got from it, that it's very much a love letter.
Yeah, to the
about
Virgin Islands.
our history, our culture, and our past, our present.
Yeah, and our future.
And our future.
Yeah. Like what are we're and it's really interesting that I finished the book at a time when we're continually having these conversations about global warming. We're having these conversations about how can we be better stewards of the gift that we've been given. And that's essentially the premise of the book is, okay, so we're more connected than we think, and we have to take better care of the things, of the gifts that we've been given. And how do we do that on the small and the large scale?
What is the key message of your book?
So key message, I would say, is connecting with your identity, connecting with your history and your culture is the pathway to helping us to make decisions about the future. What are our core values, and how can we take those core values and make decisions that are going to help not just ourselves individually, but as our communities? What were our past victories? How do we help transition those past histories into, and those victories into something that's going to help propel us forward so that we can take care of not just the gift that is the Virgin Islands, but the gift that is our world, and how do we do that as a community?
And I found it really interesting that you were telling this story with young people.
Yeah.
And through the eyes of young people who are probably more open.
Yes.
More open to, hey, there are mermaids.
Yes.
And open to different things than older people.
Yeah.
With our biases and our issues.
Yeah.
might be.
Yeah, like the main character's conflict is because she's a teacher and she takes them, on this field trip, and so she's struggling with like, oh my goodness, I'm going to jail, right? Like I've lost these people's kids.
Yeah.
And the kids are like, okay, so what can we do? Like, how do we help? What's the story? And so it also goes back to fundamentally, kids are not weighed down by all of the social pressures that adults are. They're more flexible. And how do we maintain that flexibility mentally so that we can continue to help people?
And in your story, one of the things where people were the students saw that they had these connections where they were seeing green light.
Yeah.
And I think that was also a cue that there are amazing things happening around us. We just have to open our eyes and see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're also, as adults, we have a tendency we'll see something and we'll write that off as like, oh, this is whatever. And when you're a younger person, you find meaning in ordinary and extraordinary things. And so the kids are really the helper of the main character, to help her to really see what she needs to see so she can be everything that she needs to be. And kids are amazing. Kids are amazing. They're great coaches. Like I taught school, but the kids taught me more than I ever taught them. So it's just nice to let them know that they have such a great impact on the lives of adults all the time.
And with that intro, I'd love for you to share a passage from your book with our audience.
And so this, just sort of set it up a little bit, this is chapter 2 of Myrrh. And what I'm getting at here is the ancestral home. So it's called Freedom. Love does not claim possession, but gives freedom. And it's by Rabindranath Tagore. I wish I was pronouncing that person's name properly. Wiping the sweat from her brow, Tarla scanned the space. Bringing order to chaos always boosted her mood. She bent over to run the mop along the eggshell baseboard. Her goal was to tidy up before the workmen arrived. Tarla was 6 years old the day her grandparents first brought her to Surgeon Fry. They drove up the nearly deserted dirt road, surrounded by the kind of vegetation she dreamed she would encounter in the Amazon. The trees hugged the windows of her grandparents' crimson Nissan sedan, reaching out, she imagined, to grab her. When at last the jostling finished and the motor was silenced, her grandmother came around the side of the car and offered her her hand. Even then, Tarla thought her grandmother's hand was small, dark, and strong. She looked into her face, and as their eyes locked, they both smiled. As Tarla slid out of the back seat, her grandmother whispered into her ear, "We're bringing you to a very special place today." "Is it a secret place?" asked Tarla, excited by the notion of having special knowledge all her own. "No, not secret, just special. It belonged to your grandfather's father, and his grandfather's father, and his father before him." "Grandpa has a grandpa?" Tarla asked. That seemed a hard truth to swallow because even at 6, her grandfather looked too old to sit on the lap of an even older man. "Every grandpa has a grandpa, and those grandparents have grandparents," her grandmother replied with a smile. "Luce," called her grandfather. Luce was the pet name for Tarla's grandmother. Her grandmother's name was Ira Lucille, but every person Tarla ever met called her Sister McClevity or Lucille. When her grandfather was in a particularly amorous mood, Lucille was shortened to Luce. That afternoon, in the heart of Tarla's newly revealed special place, her grandpa grumbled kind-heartedly to his wife. "Luce, what kind of nonsense is you asking that girl?" And then she says, "I was just explaining to her how old the house is." "Oh, all right." And so I based those particular characters on my grandparents, which is lovely.
And in your writing and in your writing about these characters and in writing about Luce, you could see the very special relationship and the history that they have. So when you set out to write Myrrh, Did you have any experience writing anything else, any other fiction?
I had written a lot of poetry in college because I took a creative writing class, and probably I took a short story. I wrote a short story or two, but I had never tackled a novel before. So what I ended up doing was I did a story outline, which is thankfully what my literature teacher taught me is let's line up the characters, the setting, and let's look at the story arc. And from that, I went ahead and I divided up the chapters into themes of like these are the things that are actually going to happen in the story. And from then, I just wrote each chapter based on the theme.
How long did it take you from having this amazing dream,
Right.
and saying that you were going to write a book to actually finishing?
20 years. It took me 20 years.
20 years?
Yes. It didn't take me 20 years to write it. It was like 19 years of procrastination and then like a year of writing. That's the truth. And so what I ended up doing was, because I would start and I would stop and then I would edit, which is not what you're supposed to do.
Right.
You're supposed to just write all the way through. So the advice to people who want to write their own book, do not edit your own work. You cannot edit your own work. Don't edit. Just write and write. So I would call myself like,
well, don't edit as you go
as you're
along,
writing,
because
yes.
I think that
You
is
will-
damaging to the creative process.
yes, you want to edit, but you want to write everything first. And then it's going to be bad. And that's okay. That's when you go back and you edit all your stuff. So what I ended up doing was I would do sprints. So I would do 30 days.
But are you writing longhand, paper and pen,
Oh,
on
no.
your computer?
Nah, I'm
What's your
typing everything
process?
else. Like everything is typed out. And so again, because I have the chapter titles, I know what's going to happen in each chapter. I know. I have a gist of what's going to happen in each chapter, and then I fill in that information. And people were like, did anything surprise? I was like, yeah, I got surprised all the time. Like I would start writing and I'm like, oh, okay, this I didn't know we were going in this direction. This is kind of cool. This is fun. And then I would only after I got through writing the entire book did I say, okay, let me go back and process. But it took, again, I did sprints. I would do a 30-day sprint where I was like, okay, I'm going to fast. I'm not going to watch television. I'm not going to do social media for 30 days.
So that's how you balance being creative with everything else going on in your life. Okay.
So I didn't try to do it like, I'm going to do it every day for a year. That's not going to work. You need to have a collapsed time frame to do all your work. And I did it for like an hour to 2 hours each morning. So I would just get up and I devoted that time to writing the book. And that's how I got through it. Like when I got serious about it, that's how I did it.
So what's next?
Good question. So I laugh because when I finished Myrrh and I sent it out to everybody, because I was like, okay, I need to get,
So you thought it was going to be a one and done?
I thought it was gonna be one and done. I was like, here's recommendation. Like I'm sending this to you because I want you to write a recommendation for the back of the book. And I sent it out and I was like, haha, I'm great. And then after like the evening of that, I had crippling anxiety. I was like, oh, this is gonna be horrible. Like nobody's gonna read it, nobody's like it. And then the guy was like, oh, you thought you was writing one book. I got 6 more books for you to write. And so this is the first in a 6-book series.
So we will definitely be seeing more
Yes.
of Myrrh and Melissa Fredericks.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure to learn more about our local talent, Melissa Fredericks, and her book, Myrrh. For more information on this book or any of the books featured on this program, visit our website at www.wtjx.org. We appreciate your support of our local authors, and we'll see you next week when we take another book from the Bookcase.
The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters. This program was underwritten in part by
Janelle Encarnacion Art.
and viewers like you.